As I started, we looked at a lot of different areas, and our final report will have some very specific information. We're really giving you a broad overview. I mentioned that we had a lot of very different disciplines amongst our group, and that really added a lot of value to this kind of project, because we're going to move now to another aspect of our studies, which is park planning and ponds management, what to do with those smaller ponds. This was an area where our landscape architects really stepped up and really got excited about this park planning. A large part of the planning for the parks area was public input. And we've held a number of meetings throughout the year where we got input from the community as to what they would really like to see in the parks surrounding Lake Marion, what's important to them. And we've incorporated that into some conceptual designs for the park area, as well as what about those small ponds? What do we do about that? Because they're also receiving water from the diversion of Black Earth Creek, and once that goes away, then the ponds are an issue. What about that area? What's sort of the options we have for that area? So this next section is really looking at the areas surrounding the lake and really providing recreational opportunities for the community in that park setting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brad Vowels, who got that.
So as Joe mentioned, throughout this process we surveyed the community through these meetings, also going out and talking to them while we were conducting our research at the lake. And we went to several events. We went to the family fishing days, and we did surveys. We also, at these meetings, we did mapping, finding out where you currently use the lake and what you'd like to see in future scenarios at Lake Marion. These are just a few of the photos from the many events that we use to interact with you guys and figure out what you want to happen at Lake Marion and where do you want some of these recommendations to take place that we mentioned earlier. We started out by surveying what is taking place at Lake Marion right now. Where are the picnic tables? Where is most of the activity? And then we came to these meetings with this information and asked you to map out where do you use this stuff. Where do you concentrate your uses, fishing? Where would you like to see trails? Where would you like to concentrate wildlife habitat? Add more fishing areas? And overall, we found out that you just want to keep the park pretty natural. We used all the maps that we generated at that meeting. We had 12 maps that the groups generated, and we combined them into this one map. I know you can't really see it from back there. We have these maps in the back for you guys to check out in detail after the meeting, and I'm going to break it down a little bit more by area, focusing on Lake Marion first and then moving to the smaller ponds. We really found a lot of different trends going on at Lake Marion and what you want to happen there. But most importantly, we wanted to respect the current uses of Lake Marion and maintain those and improve those, just so you guys can continue using the lake the way you do. A big portion of that was also increasing the access to the lake, making it more of a regional destination through the use of trails along the outside edges and along the levees of Lake Marion. And then increasing the fishing areas that take place around the lake, and dredging and using the sediment and stuff to realign and reconfigure the banks could add to these current fishing areas and offer some really nice areas to increase the native habitat and also increase the fishing potential at the lake. Next, we asked where do you currently use the lake the most, and this obviously takes place along Highway KP here and along this levee. So we figured that this would probably be the place where you would have the most mowed lawn area, and so this could be interspersed with some of that native habitat and more increased plantings and things, as well as those open areas which are used so much by the kids and things right now. Also, we asked you where do you want the native areas to be at Lake Marion. So where do you want this native habitat to be along the shoreline, or where do you not need as much access to that shore for fishing and other things? And you guys wanted more of the native areas to be along the railroad corridor and along that levee at Lake Marion. We also asked you, where do you need access for parking? So we noticed some trends along Highway KP that there's not enough parking along those areas. A lot of people just pull off and park in the grass. So some of that grass could maybe be converted to gravel or some kind of other paving material, so you guys aren't making such a huge impact on those grass areas at Lake Marion. Next, we focused on the smaller ponds. This probably has the most opportunity for changing the landscape at Lake Marion due to what's going on there now. There's a lot of opportunity to reconfigure this and have a lot of creativity when kind of redoing this area and thinking about what it could potentially be for the community. Again, the trails was a huge thing, increasing the access along the levee areas and across to the other side of Black Earth Creek to maybe access the high school. Again, maintaining those fishing areas up on that levee, and again, some access to the creek to promote fishing in those areas. We also asked that, where do you want the native areas here? We saw a huge trend in almost all of the maps that this was the most naturalized area, where the most of the community wanted to leave this part alone and let it be natural, and let it be wildlife habitat. So you could increase the wildlife observation areas. We noticed a lot of people use this place for bird watching and just relaxing and watching wildlife. So using this area for those wildlife observation through maybe some wildlife observation piers, put in some duck boxes, and really try to attract a bunch of native species to this area so you can really enjoy those. Also, you guys wanted to add another picnic pavilion so you could get out further in Lake Marion and kind of do some things with family in kind of a more sheltered environment like you do along Highway KP. But this would be more sheltered from the road. And as I mentioned before, all of this stuff is on a map that we're going to be turning over to the village, all these options and things that the community really spoke about. And we use those options to, I guess, synthesize what you guys wanted and be able to come up with a few options and a few visuals of what is going to take place at Lake Marion, or some scenarios that could potentially happen. And I'm going to turn it over to Lauren Brown, who was the main author, I guess, of these maps and other things that she's going to show you. So with that.
Thank you, Brad. And as Brad was talking about before, we got a lot of really great feedback from you guys as to what could happen potentially in the pond site as well as around Lake Marion. And so what I'm attempting to do in this next section is really illustrate some of those options for you. And really it's a synthesis of what we heard from you and also what we learned this summer during our field investigations. So first and most importantly, as our focus of the WRM practicum is Lake Marion. And this really is one illustration of what could happen at Lake Marion based upon some of the recommendations that Tina and David had mentioned earlier, as well as things that we just heard from you guys. One of those being increasing the lake depth to improve the fisheries and the water quality. Some of that dredged material could then be used and pushed along the edges to create that shoreline habitat that Tina was talking about to increase biodiversity around the edges. Right here. Also, we could provide lots more opportunities for fishing nodes around the lake and possibly improving the existing fishing pier. We heard that these recreational lawn spaces along KP are used, and we'd like to improve those areas and maybe frame them with more native landscapes to provide that buffer along the lake edge. A pavilion, in one of our workshops, there was talk about locating a pavilion maybe in that corner for access to the southern ponds. And then parking. There's lots of opportunities for improving the existing parking zones that are along the existing fishing pier and south of Lake Marion, as well as creating a parking area for improved access to the existing picnic shelter. And so moving on to the small ponds, as Brad mentioned, this is the area that probably has the biggest potential for change, since when the dam is removed, Black Earth Creek water supplies makeup water to these ponds. If that's gone, there's really an opportunity to do something different here. And so in thinking about that, we actually had some of you participated in this summer. We had a design workshop, or a charrette, where we got out trace paper and markers and brainstormed together ideas for this space. And a few of the things that we heard were preserve and enhance the ponds, or create a wetlands and nature park area. Other suggestions were to restore the site to an oak savanna, which this landscape historically was. Maybe there's opportunities for improved open space, or potentially even some community gardens. So, actually going back before I move on. So what I did here is develop 3 different planning options that really kind of run the spectrum of what you could do, from very wet, preserving the ponds, to filling the ponds and creating more open space. The next 3 options are just very conceptual suggestions. There's lots of different things we can do, but it's meant to sort of tease your brain and give you some ideas for how to move forward in your planning process. So the first option that I explored was creating this water garden. And this scheme really is about improving the existing large pond and filling in the smaller pond to create a more meaningful open space area along that railroad corridor. And I actually suggest filling that pond in all 3 options. In this option, it's very much similar to the recommendations that we have for Lake Marion. Right now it's a very consistently shallow body of water, not very good water quality. So we'd suggest deepening that area by dredging, using those dredge spoils to create some wetland edges along the edges, maybe some habitat islands in there. It could be really fun and beautiful. However, you'd also need to investigate the presence and the integrity of the clay lining underneath that lake, as well as prevent seepage and the seepage control measures that we talked about earlier. And of course, you need to supply it with water, so it'd be additional water on top of the water supply to Lake Marion. It could be the same pumping system, but it is a little bit more water. The second option, this is something I personally was really interested in exploring, was this idea of creating a wetland park. And so this scheme, you can see that there's this emergent wetland near Lake Marion, and that can be excavated and the fill then put over kind of in a yin-yang scenario to create this upland area, which could be a community garden, it could be an orchard, it could just be another open space. However, from our field studies this summer, we learned that groundwater is actually 9 feet or so below Lake Marion, and it's also below the pond. So in order to create this kind of system to be naturally fed through groundwater, you'd have to excavate a hole that's about 9 or 10 feet deep. That's a pretty considerable hole. Or else, if you wanted to create this kind of landscape, you'd also have to pump. So just something to consider in your planning process. And then lastly, looking at this idea of creating a sunken open space. And this was really the attempt to fill the large pond, but not to fill it all the way, to kind of leave a trace of its history. You could use the bermed edges to create a grass terrace down maybe 2 or 3 feet to a wider lawn that could be used really as a flexible open space for sporting events, community events, kite flying with the kids. It could even be filled in the wintertime and used as an ice skating rink. If you'd like to go that far, maybe you'd do something a little bit more formal and surround the edge with maybe an oak promenade. And that would create a really lovely outdoor room that perhaps could then be faded out into a more natural area, perhaps even an extension of this existing wetland that's just south of the southern ponds. So just some big ideas, the full spectrum of things to consider. There's lots of other options in between, but really this is meant to get you brainstorming about, what can we do with this space? And we hope that you continue to collaborate together to come up with that vision. So on to the floodplain, Joe.
Okay, on to the third major area. We really have focused at this point on Lake Marion, the surrounding area of Lake Marion. But we had a number of students in our class that were very interested in the floodplain and the